Assalamu alaikum, you're watching Views and News and I'm Faisal Rehman live from our Islamabad studios. Today we'll be talking about the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. This is the 7th day since the Russian forces entered into Ukraine, and so far, according to Ukrainian sources, 2,100 civilians have been killed and around 4,000 have been injured. Whereas when you talk about the displaced number of people, the number is over 1 million, out of which 850,000 they have so far either gone to Poland, Romania, in certain cases Moldova and Hungary perhaps. These are the countries, whereas most of them they have gone to Poland. The World Bank has also announced an immediate relief package of $3 billion, whereas the European Union earlier has decided to give them a grant of 450 million euros, and that most likely is going to be in the form of weapons and arms. As far as Germany is concerned now, they seem to be pretty reluctant. Initially, they were pretty reluctant to enter this war. But interestingly, what has happened is that now they have also decided to increase their military budget. And that means that they will be having this military equipment every year. That purchase is going to be around 2% of their GDP. So you can well imagine the amount I'm talking about here. As far as the oil crisis is concerned, or the gas prices, or perhaps the coal that is used by the European Union, 40% of the energy of coal, 35% is regarding the oil, and around 45% that is the dependency on gas as far as European Union is concerned. So that's a huge number. The prices, they have skyrocketed. As we all know that the oil prices that is hovering well over $100 a barrel. Certain people predict that it could go up to 120 and perhaps beyond that. Now, the longer the conflict is going to go on, the more problem is going to be there. Obviously, a lot of financial sanctions have been imposed on the Russians, personal sanctions on Vladimir Putin as well. But as far as the Ukrainian Zelensky is concerned, the gentleman believes that he is fighting well along with his troops and civilians, and they have claimed that they have killed over 6,000 Russian soldiers and destroyed hundreds of their tanks and hundreds of their jets. But how credible is that information? Even the CNN has not commented on that, and they said we have not yet verified that. So we'll be talking about that in detail in today's program, where the conflict is heading, what sort of a role perhaps Pakistan can play, what kind of an expectation should we keep from China. They are trying to keep themselves very neutral. They have abstained in the UN Security Council along with India as well as UAE, if you remember. But most of the European countries, rather every European country, along with the Americans, now they are planning to put more pressure on Vladimir Putin. Whereas Vladimir Putin is concerned, this man means business. He says not an inch towards east anymore, and perhaps that is the reason he had to attack Ukraine. Now, to talk about this, we have with us in our studio on my right is Dr. Adil Sultan Saab. Adil Sultan Saab is the Dean and Head of Department Strategic Studies, A University, Islamabad. Sir, thank you very much for your time. Pleasure to have you on the show, sir. And we also have with us Dr. Tughral Yamin Saab, again needs no introduction, is a Senior Analyst. Thank you very much, sir, for your time. And we also have with us from Italy, Milan, Liliana Gorini. She is the Political Analyst, and she's also joining us from there. Thank you very much, Liliana, for your time as well. But let me start off from you, Dr. Adil Sultan. Now, the current situation, it's the 7th day of the Ukrainian invasion. A lot of bloodshed, a lot of civilian casualties have been reported also, sir. As far as Kiev is concerned, or Kharkiv, I mean, these both major cities, along with Odessa also now, we can say. So they are under attack, extreme attack, I would say. Almost 40-mile long, a caravan is also approaching the major cities, and that means that 25% fresh soldiers and new equipment is going to be there. So that means that we will see more fierce fighting in the coming days. Now, under these given circumstances, sir, how long can we wait? And the civilian casualties, I mean, that is something of prime concern. Let's start off from there.
About civilian casualties, what we are hearing are mainly the Western sources, because we do not have alternative perspective. This is a bloody war, and but what we see from the other side, if you see Russia Today or some other objective channels who are reporting objectively, probably Russians are trying their best not to hit the main cities or the civilians, but there is collateral damage, as we see from the videos and from the various news reports. This is going to continue because what West is doing, probably pushing more Putin against the wall, and Putin is retaliating. So this is likely to intensify in the coming days.
And putting the nuclear arms or the setup or those divisions which control that particular site, sir, on high alert, whether through the sea, through the air, through bombers or through missile systems, sir, don't you think that is a mega threat?
That's a major signaling from Putin, because he had to, the way West was responding and United States was raising the ante, and probably he has made it clear that he can go to any limits by signaling that nuclear alert. But I don't think so. He would be pushed to use nuclear weapons eventually. It's more of a signaling at this moment, what we see.
Just a threat perception, perhaps?
It's more of a signaling, not to cross certain red line beyond which he's probably telling the West that there would be a point of no return, and it can escalate to even nuclear exchange also.
Now, that is of prime concern. Sir, now, Dr. Saab, when we talk about the Russian interest in the region, so obviously after the fall of Berlin Wall, things were very clear that yes, we remember that we used to hear that West Germany hockey team, West, Maghribi Germany as they used to call it in Urdu. And then we got to know that these two countries got united. I mean, the same country, which was into two halves, East and West, got together. But at the same time, sir, the Russian leadership at that time also mentioned very clearly that not an inch towards East. But now what we have witnessed over a period of time, whether you talk about Lithuania, Latvia, or you talk about Poland, you talk about Romania, Hungary, I mean, these are countries which are right bordering those states which used to be a part of Russian Empire. But sir, the American presence or the NATO presence, let me put it this way, they are there and constantly pinching Vladimir Putin, sir, or Russia in general. Was this expected, whatever we have witnessed over the last week?
This was expected, but as you yourself mentioned that when the Cold War ended, there was a tacit agreement that the NATO would not expand eastwards. That was some kind of tacit agreement, but NATO did not abide by that promise. It was constantly expanding. They have now 30 members. Poland, which was instantly the headquarters of the Warsaw Pact countries,
yes,
is a major NATO country now. You go to Poland and you would not feel that it was ever part of the Soviet alliance system. You cannot feel the way they have transformed themselves. Anyhow, Putin has been saying for a very long time that Ukraine is a red line. Ukraine is a red line for Putin because Ukraine was part of Russia. It was not just part of Soviet Union, it has been part of Russia. And Putin has been talking about, not nostalgically about Soviet Union, he's been talking about the Russian Empire. He has those kind of visions in his mind. He sees Russia reunited as a big empire. And all of us know that after the Soviet Union broke up, the Russians were belittled, humiliated. They were considered smaller creatures. The former Soviet countries, including,
they had lost that glory once they had
lost. It had dimmed. Countries like Ukraine, which possessed nuclear weapons through the various initiatives, Nuremberg initiative, and other countries which possessed nuclear weapons, had to give up nuclear weapons. They were encouraged to give up nuclear weapons. They were paid money for that, but they actually, this was a self-inflicted wound, because we know if you have nuclear weapons, nobody dare attacks you. That's a big, potent deterrence. And if Putin is upping the ante and saying that my nuclear threat is more evident or more, I don't know the exact word he's using, but he's saying that the alertness levels have gone up. It could be any.
I mean, he has informed his chief of general staff and the defense minister.
Yes.
And he has been very categorical that you need to.
So he is using nuclear signaling. Nuclear signals have been used in history after the invention of the nuclear bomb. The first time a nuclear signal was sent was by the United States to the Soviet Russians who were still occupying Iran. They said, you vacate these areas or we will use the nuclear weapons. Then in the Suez Canal crisis, the Russians used the same, Soviet Union used the same analogy. They also said that we can use nuclear weapons.
Cuban crisis?
Cuban crisis was a hair trigger kind of thing in which Khrushchev was involved, Kennedy was involved. Who got the upper hand was one still, maybe the jury is out. Maybe, I don't read the Russian literature. Americans said we won it, Russians perhaps say we won it. But anybody who came out unscathed from the Cuban Missile Crisis was that small island country called Cuba, because they could not kill Castro. Castro remained, he died a natural death. Anyhow, Khrushchev was also kicked out. Kennedy was killed. Both major protagonists died badly, poorly. The thing ended in quite a bit of shame for both countries. So it has been used. Pakistan, India have used nuclear signals. It's always a very an act of brinkmanship.
North Korea?
North Korea has come up very, very well out of all this. They have been signaling. Even now, before the Beijing Olympic Games, they carried out six missile tests. So they have been showing that, look, we can reach even the United States, mainland United States. So nuclear signaling is the last resort. After that, you go up the escalation ladder and probably push the button. So it has reached that level. Ukraine does not possess nuclear weapons. America has nuclear weapons.
So you don't see de-escalation in this particular case anytime soon?
I don't foresee it, because I think Putin has made up his mind to take Ukraine. You cannot blame him for that. He will take, he's already recognized the Donbas regions, and instantly Ukraine, every third Ukrainian is Russian. So they are brothers, they are kin. It's not like Ukrainians are German speaking, or they speak Russian. Most of them speak
Most
Russian.
of them, they do, yes.
So Putin can absorb them. He has the capacity to absorb them. And
the kind of firepower he has and the firepower he is using, yes, that's enormous, huge.
And if he has taken 7 days and not taken Kyiv, it means that perhaps he is also not in a great deal of hurry to capture the entire country.
Wait and see strategy.
It's a big country. It's a huge country with a very small population.
All right.
And eastern portion is already with them. Crimea, they have already annexed in 2014. So maybe another week, 10 days, 20 days. I don't think economic sanctions will stop him.
So let's take this point, because when you talk about either SWIFT or you talk about economic sanctions on the major companies, they'll be barred from having different transactions. Today I was listening to the Chinese television, CGTN, and they were saying that we will keep on doing our trade the way we were doing before, and there is not going to be any significant change. But as far as Europe is concerned, sir, their dependency on oil, coal, or energy, and so many other,
gas
in general, I mean, that is going to be huge. And few countries, I mean, even the German chancellor said that, we should have taken care of our energy needs, shouldn't have been dependent so much on Russia. So I think the mindset is also changing. But where will it lead? I mean, that's $1 million question. Let me have a word with Liliana Gorini. Liliana, since you're a political analyst, you've been, I'm sure, watching the situation very carefully. Italy has its own perspective. But as a neutral observer, share your thoughts with us. Tell us what exactly you feel, how the people are feeling in Italy, because at the end of the day, Italy perhaps is going to be one of those countries which will definitely get affected, not perhaps as much as Germany or Finland or countries like Latvia, Lithuania, but yes, they will. Your take, ma'am.
Yes, you're right. There is a big worry in Italy in this moment, because the parliament last night voted in favor of sending weapons to Ukraine. So Italy is part of the war. And Premier Draghi also decided to send 3,000 400 soldiers to the neighboring states, probably Poland, with the intention of joining the Ukraine army, which is on the side of Italy an act of war. And Italy is in Europe the country which is most hit by the sanctions and by the situation itself, by the war itself, because as opposed to Germany, who still has some nuclear power and has coal, or to France, which has nuclear power, Italy depends on Russian gas for 45% of its consumption. So most of the Italians are worried on the one side for the escalation of the war and the risk of a nuclear war, because Italy's constitution normally forbids the country to join a war, and instead we are part of a war. So we could, since Putin said people who send us weapons will be made responsible, we could be a target militarily. And the second thing, which actually worries the population even more, is the economic effect, particularly the dependence on Gazprom, which with the SWIFT decision to have sanctions on the SWIFT payments will make it very difficult for companies to pay Gazprom, and we depend. We had actually before the crisis started, we had a discussion with Italian businessmen and Putin online, in which Putin assured Italy that the supplies would continue. But under these circumstances, we are not sure what will happen. And the fact that Ukraine should join NATO is seen with great worry. We had, in particular in Italy, since I work with the Schiller Institute, we have the two trade unionists, important trade unionists, who signed the Schiller Institute petition for a new architecture for the security of all in replacement of NATO, because they know that already now we have high unemployment and a lot of people are losing their jobs after 2 years of COVID. If Italy participates through the war and the sanctions continue, we will have a population which is in poverty.
Now, another point which I want you to throw light on is that, this word crippling sanctions, that has been used quite frequently now by the US in particular. I was listening to President Biden while he was addressing the Union
State of the Union.
State of Union address. And interestingly, I mean, initially he was talking about the domestic issues and the problems they have had. But one important factor was also about the Ukrainian issue. Now, if military support starts to get to Ukraine, even initially we have learned that no NATO forces will be deployed or will be sent inside Ukraine. But let's assume for a moment that another week from now, things do get bad, couple of other major cities are under the control of the Russians, more people are dying, more refugees pouring into Europe. And obviously, if you're talking about 1 million, that's a big number. But honestly speaking, we have had, whether you talk about Pakistan, we have had more than 3 million refugees. And even now, during the latest crisis, we have had over 200,000 more. You talk about during the Syrian crisis, look at the number of people who fled to Turkey for that matter, or other countries. Whereas these people were stopped from entering Romania or Poland or Europe for that matter. Only Germany had allowed a few. Ma'am, my question is very straightforward now, and that is, whenever the Americans, they attack any country in the name of liberation, that we will liberate them, or we will bring in democracy for that matter because there was a dictator. The point is, ma'am, millions of people have been killed, but the entire Western media supported the American and the NATO cause. Whether you talk about Afghanistan, look at where they are, where they were. Look at Syria, look at Iraq, look at the states like Egypt for that matter, Libya, and so many Muslim states. There's a long list. Forget about Korea or Cambodia or Laos for that matter. They were in Far East. But ma'am, they make it legitimate through media. Mr. Colin Powell used to say that, you know, weapons of mass destruction, look, they are here. He was showing them in the UN. Now my point is that whereas the West constantly they have been pinching Vladimir Putin. So, ma'am, don't you think this particular, reaction was perhaps very much expected?
You're asking me still?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. The extent of the reaction of President Putin was not expected. But what I expected and didn't happen was that some European countries in the past had an attitude of interest, for example, for the New Silk Road, for the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, including my own country. Italy was the first G7 country who joined the Belt and Road in 2019, and their attitude was that of economic cooperation at that time with both China and Russia, and also that these wars which aim at regime change, like the ones you mentioned in Syria, Yemen, which is still being bombed, and nobody is making big protests against this. Iraq, all this was mentioned at that time as an example of the fact that we need a different attitude from Europe and a bigger cooperation with Russia and China. This has been ended since Draghi took over the government and the European Union decided to stop, to prevent the cooperation between Europe and China on the New Silk Road, on the Belt and Road Initiative. This stopped, and Italy turned into yet another servant of the American and British interests. And this is very, very bad for not only Italy, but Europe. Let's think about Scholz canceling the Nord Stream 2. This will have effects, not so much on Russia, because Russia is making deals with the gas with China, but it will have effects on Germany and on all of Europe. And people are really, really worried by this warmongering attitude of the European Union, with Ursula von der Leyen even using the Fund for Peace of the European Union to finance weapons, which is really the absolute hypocrisy. Not to speak about the fact that we had just recently the Day of Memory about the winning against Nazism in Germany and the Russians liberating Auschwitz. And instead, what's happening now is that we are supplying weapons to neo-Nazi militias in Ukraine. So all this hypocrisy about never again Nazism, we have created a government in Kyiv, which includes neo-Nazi militias like the Azov Battalion and the Banderistas. And this is a shame, is a total shame for Europe. And I assure you, while the governments and the media ignore this fact, the Italian population, we write about this every day on Facebook and the social media.
As a media man,
yes,
what surprises me the most is that there is a lot of problem in Afghanistan. The Americans are not even letting them have their food. Those people are practically selling their kidneys to feed their families. I mean, there is this one scenario here. Nobody is talking about it, not even any media. Whereas whenever I get to see the Western television channels, and I have an access of more than 50 different channels of the Western world, ma'am, it is only about Ukraine, maligning Russia and promoting United States of America's interest. But let me come to you now, sir. Unipolar concept, bipolar concept, and let's not call it multipolar, let's call it tripolar. Is there any word of that sort, sir?
Multipolar.
It's a multipolar.
Multi
yeah.
or because
Yeah.
China, Russia, and United States of America.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly, sir, America has never been challenged. Few challenges what we have witnessed were initially from China, when they forcefully, made sure that the spy plane of America should land, and whatever happened, we all got to know. One of their jet was also shot down, the Chinese jet, if you remember, or maybe it was struck or something happened.
Collision.
And then after that, sir, Vladimir Putin, whether you talk about Russia, whether you talk about Syria or otherwise, I mean, this man means business. Perhaps Americans have been challenged for the very, very first time, sir. And that is something which really, they just cannot digest that. And perhaps this is their retaliation also, using the Europeans. At the end of the day, America is not going to suffer, Europeans will suffer. Because that is where the problem is. Whether you talk about the First World War, who were the sufferers? Europeans. Second World War, all over the world, starting with Africa and Asia, elsewhere. But major sufferers were Germany, France, Italy, UK. So don't you think, sir, this decision has to have some sort of a weightage coming in from the European side rather than listening too much to the US?
About Putin response, I think Putin has been compelled to respond because it has a history. 2008, we all see, it was NATO and United States which declared that maybe Georgia and Ukraine would eventually be admitted into NATO. That was a red line Putin has always been saying. And let me also, interesting phrase that I read today by John Mearsheimer, he was quoting President Putin, that anyone who doesn't remember the great Soviet Union doesn't have a heart, but anyone who thinks Russia would again be back to Soviet Union, he doesn't have brains. So that means he's very realistic in his options. So what he was saying since 2008, don't cross this red line, he would have been comfortable, or he may have accepted EU enlargement, but not NATO enlargement right on its next border. So that was his red line, and that is why he's telling this. Yes, you also mentioned about this unipolar. I think we can see it from a different perspective also. While United States was focused on China's perceived threat and its national security strategy also mentioned China, the last one, Russia was interestingly did not figure out much in that strategy. So their focus was about China, and they were moving towards this AUKUS and moving Quad, having these regional arrangements towards China. But what was happening in Europe, you must have noticed that there was a sense of discontent amongst the NATO countries whether US would come to the rescue or not in case of any future threat. And lately, what we had seen...
If you remember, sir, when Donald Trump took charge, I mean, he did take a lot of interesting, let me use this word, interesting steps, whether regarding Mexico's wall or NAFTA or starting from China to God knows what in Middle Eastern change. But he also spoke about NATO. He said at least 2.5% of your GDP should be spent on the military equipment and the military hardware. And you should be purchasing it from us. But interestingly, sir, 2.5% I'm talking about, that's a huge number.
Absolutely.
And he says that, but sir, NATO has never fought. They have never created a problem. It was always United States of America that used NATO for its own personal gains and objectives.
Absolutely. So that's what US is likely to get out of this crisis. Because NATO, we had heard these rumors, especially from countries like France also, that EU should have its own military because under Trump, US was not a reliable or guarantor for their security. So there were rumors, there was talk about this. Through this crisis, again, Europe has no one else to revert back. And now the countries are ready to spend more, even more than 2.5%, because the way this threat has been projected against NATO, against the European Union countries, and US is going to achieve that objective, that it is going to be once again become a dominant power in Europe. But on the other hand, its focus shift towards back to Europe would also have advantage for China also, because US would... It was in the process of moving its bases from Europe and bringing it to contain China. So I think after this, if they start moving back to Europe, China would be much happy about this. But let me take this opportunity also to clarify about a comment on the nuclear signaling. I think that nuclear signaling was a message by Putin. Putin will not gain anything by using nuclear weapons, because if there is a use of nuclear weapons, so it is end of the world.
Story, yes?
Yeah, it's end of the world. And you must have also noticed U.S. reluctance not to impose no-fly zone over Ukraine, despite President Zelensky repeatedly asking that provide us that shelter, because they don't want to directly engage with the Russian Air Force. If there is air incident, it will be an all-out war. And if that war starts, there's no stopping of that. And that's why Putin has signaled preemptively, don't go at that path. And probably Putin is not interested in taking over Ukraine. It would be a big
he has very
headache.
categorically mentioned about that.
Yeah, it will be a headache for him. What he is trying to do is just capture some areas which are majority Russian speaking and gain some more territory for bargaining, because he has to have upper hand in the bargaining and negotiation with the US and EU. And that is what is going to happen eventually, because there are going to be no winners in this war. It's going to be a lasting conflict. It can span out for several months, maybe years. But eventually, all sides would have to negotiate. And probably Putin is making his position stronger. And one more point that I would also refer, you also mentioned about SWIFT and kicking Russia out of that. We have to understand, Russia is a great power. Since 2008, they must have war gamed all these contingencies.
He must have calculated something before the attack.
Absolutely. Likewise, US also, likewise other countries. But whatever he is doing, he's not doing just on knee-jerk reaction. Probably he has planned, and the economic
he has around $650 billion.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, to look after the affairs. But sir, another important point now, do you feel now, since what we have been hearing, that there is going to be a lot of military support pouring in from Europe for Ukraine, guns, night vision goggles, vests would be provided from Germany and other countries. Even MiG-29s, because they used to, I mean, they fly these planes, Ukrainian pilots, so they would like to have those also. But sir, that means that, and then he has, when you talk about Zelensky, he has asked everyone. He himself is carrying a gun and is in the streets. And I was listening to his speech also in the UN the other day, and everybody hailed him, you know, the man, he is the man. But the point is, sir, that man, whether he's right or wrong, whether he's playing in the hands of the West or not, the thing is, sir, what about if the non-state actors from Chechnya, from the softer belly side of the Russians, from Syria, Middle East, Iraq, those non-state actors who are in the payroll of the Americans, even from Afghanistan, what if they go and start fighting against the Russian forces? Because this is going to be a guerrilla kind of a warfare. So this is how it seems to me for the time being, unless until there is a total complete invasion. What is that supposed to mean for the Europeans in particular, sir, and for Vladimir Putin in general?
Faisal Saab, that's a very far-fetched scenario. I don't think that kind of thing happening in Ukraine, because that it's a Christian country. So expecting Islamic non-state actors going there and fighting against Russian, that's a far-fetched idea. If you fight asymmetrical type of war,
Chechens have their own grievances against the Russians. They are Muslims.
They have their grievances, but they like to fight in their own areas. They live in hills, and they are very well aware of their own area. You don't go out of your own area.
Is it about the religion or the money?
Sir, you have to have an environment. When you fight a guerrilla warfare, you should know the terrain. See, send an Afghan to Ukraine, he would not be able to navigate his way through the streets of Kiev or Mariupol or what else, Kherson. No. That kind of thing will not happen. If there is a partisan kind of war that's going to happen, only Ukrainians will fight their own war. Nobody can fight somebody else's guerrilla war. That has never happened. You fight in your own area. You know your own area. You can defend your own area. You can kill an outsider.
People from Pakistan and Afghanistan ended up fighting in Syria.
Sir, how many of them fought there? And
about 6,000 from Pakistan.
And what was the success ratio over there? Not much. They didn't make any difference. Even the so-called Islamic State, does not mean anything to Afghanistan because they are in minorities. They speak Arabic. They are not Afghans. They are not Tajiks. They are not Uzbeks. They are not Pashtuns. They are not Baloch. So you have to be a native. Otherwise, you're going to stick out like a sore thumb. Guerrilla wars do not happen that way. But Ukraine is now rife for partisan warfare, for civil warfare, civil war. But that kind of war will be fought by its own people. I hope it does not become an arena for international fighters. It will do nobody any good over there. I don't think that kind of thing happen. But a civil war is possible. Partisan warfare is possible. And the European Union, the ammunition or weapons that they are buying, it's not meant to fight a regular army, or it's not meant to fight a regular war. It's for guerrilla activities. If you arm them
Anti-tank missiles, for that matter.
Right, but for
they're very useful in certain conditions.
And the lady from Italy, she was talking about neo-Nazi militias over there. Yeah, you can arm them, you can use them against Russia. Instantly, the Russian representative...
Americans are known for using the non-state actors,
Yeah.
whether you call them the contractors or whatever you may name them.
But not Asians. A term was used by the representative of the Russian Federation in which it was said that Ukraine will be denazified, okay? And she also talked about certain neo-Nazi militias over there. So these are the kind of battalions or brigades or groups or non-state actors which can be used or manipulated or armed or sponsored to fight the war. Nobody from Pakistan is going to go there to fight. Yes, sir.
So, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, absolutely. You are absolutely right. People from this region went to some other countries to fight because they were used. Religion was misused to exploit their sentiments. But what is happening in Europe? European nationalism is being used to again instigate that kind of a guerrilla warfare. If you would have heard the UK Foreign Secretary, she said she would support people taking up arms, going and fighting in Ukraine against the Russian forces. Now these are non-state actors, but they are Europeans, so that would become legitimate. So what non-state actors from this part of the world going to other part, again they tend to bring negativity on our religion, so they tend to label them as terrorists, but the same non-state actors would be seen as freedom fighters. So again, what you were saying,
there was a very interesting picture on the Facebook. A young kid, maybe 12, 13 years old, was holding a rock, a small rock like the size of maybe a lemon, and he was trying to throw it on an Israeli tank.
Absolutely.
And he was rated as, the terrorist. Whereas another girl, a Ukrainian girl, was holding, I think it was an AK-47 or some other gun, a weapon, and the new, another very sweet word was used for that. Then, the kind of reporting that we have observed, sir, because the brown Muslims dying wherever, doesn't matter, but a blue-eyed, blonde, Christian European, if he's dying, oh my, we have never, because they had never seen that post World War II.
True.
So that is something very unlike, So I think there is a difference. But I think all the humans are the same. War itself is a problem. Wars cannot give you any solution. I think that was an old orthodox kind of statement that we used to have. And on top, the kinetic warfare, sir, all thought was something obsolete, but it does matter. The firepower at the end of the day, it matters. Let me take the last comment from the lady in Milan. Ma'am, do you see this war prolonging? And if so, what sort of a message it is going to be for the Europeans?
Can you repeat the question? I had an audio problem.
Sorry, ma'am?
Audio problem.
Can you repeat the question?
I'll repeat my question, ma'am. Let's suppose if this war continues for another 4 weeks, maybe more, despite the fact that Vladimir Putin says that he has no intention of capturing Ukraine, but obviously he has something in his mind, he has a certain objective which he wants to achieve. And that objective is to look after the borders, and he wants to make sure that NATO should stay away.
Yes.
And that is a very legitimate demand, ma'am, and that was also something which is not something new. We heard it decades back also. Ma'am, what if the war prolongs, the guerrilla fight starts in the cities, people keep on dying, these swift response from the from the Americans doesn't work. How do you see the future of Europe, ma'am? Because I was, in fact, interestingly going through, I mean, some sort of a prediction. I'm not talking about Nostradamus here, I'm talking about Baba Vanga. In fact, she was somebody who said that, well, I don't see Europe surviving. And she was talking about 2030, around 2030. Your take, ma'am. Final question.
Yes, my prediction is that either, also with the help of China, which has been asked to intervene in the negotiations, that finally they will come to an agreement that Ukraine does not join NATO. After all, Putin's requests are not so demanding. He wants Crimea, and he wants what he has been saying for months. He wants guarantees about the security of the border. So no Ukraine in NATO. This is like a Cuba Missile Crisis at the contrary. At that time it was Kennedy saying to Khrushchev, we don't want missiles next to our home. Now it's Putin telling this to Biden, we don't want nuclear weapons or NATO close to our border. So this is reasonable, and unless the decisions of Biden in particular, because this is not so much Russia and Ukraine, it's more Russia and the US and the UK, unless Biden keeps this crazy stand of not being willing to discuss Putin's requests for security, for everybody, like in the Peace of Westphalia, you have to include the interests of everybody. If this happens, this war will continue maybe for some weeks, but they will come to a point in which they cannot accept a no-fly zone, as it was said by my previous speakers, because this would imply a nuclear war instantly. And this even was admitted by an admiral, Italian admiral today. So the request of Zelensky of a no-fly zone is not acceptable, even to NATO, And the request of Putin that Ukraine does not join NATO is very reasonable. So if there is any reason in this world, this peace will be reached. It will take more back and forth of fightings, because obviously Putin will insist with the fightings in order to get a better stand in negotiations. But it will come to that. The hypothesis of my previous speakers that this becomes a guerrilla war and it goes on for years is terrifying, because in this case, as you were saying, this will involve mercenary contractors, as they were used by Americans in Iraq and other places. So these are not Ukrainians who want to defend their country. These are people who go to war for money. And that will
I'm so sorry
create...
to cut you here. We are totally running out of time, but anyway, thank you very much for your comments and for your participation in the show. Sir, always great to have you, sir. And thank you so much for your time, sir. And that's all we have for this hour. I'll see you inshallah tomorrow, 8 to 5 p.m. Till then, you take good care of yourself. Khuda Hafiz.